Let's get started. First of all, allow me to say a huge welcome on this virtual Camino in Croatia. If you'd like to introduce yourself and let us know where are you from, we seem to be having people from all over Europe and even Canada. So, for about 45 minutes, an hour, we'll be sharing a multimedia journey on a new Camino route in Croatia. But our story begins, as always, on the Camino de Santiago and with St. James. How did that story, but forgive me first, allow me to introduce myself. My name is Vedran, and I'm the secretary for the Croatian Confraternity of St. James here in Croatia. But more importantly, I had a distinct privilege and a blessing to walk the Camino 5 times so far, and I do wish to come back as soon as possible. But since we can't, let's try to make most of this virtual experience. Who is St. James, the Santiago in the Camino de Santiago, or the Way of St. James? According to the Bible and the Gospels, he was a James Zebedee, one of the few apostles who was given a nickname by Jesus, the Son of Thunder, together with his brother. The other apostle who received the nickname was, of course, Peter the Rock. He was the first martyr among the apostles, protector of Spain. It's interesting to notice that in the Gospels, it is James, together with Peter and John, who appears at certain critical moments in the Gospel narrative. The prayer in the Gethsemane garden before the Passion of Christ, and as a witness to the Transfiguration of Christ, and some other events as well. So after the apostles were given a task to spread the good news all over the world, St. James was given Spain as his task. He was pretty desperate at the time and thought he didn't do quite a good job of preaching the gospel in Spain. So as he was laying on the shores of River Ebro in Spain, he had, according to legend at least, the first apparition of the Madonna, who appeared on a pillar. And in Zaragoza, you can find a shrine, one of the oldest shrines to the Madonna, Nuestra Señora de Pilar, Our Lady of the Pillar. So Our Lady told him that things will work out for him and that his task will be a success, but that his destiny is to suffer martyrdom back in Holy Land. After his death, his disciples decided to smuggle his body back to Spain, and according to the legend, medieval legends, stories went round and around how there is a sacred tomb of St. James somewhere in Galicia in Spain. Oh, we have somebody from Galicia. Bienvenido. So how did the story begin? The story began in early 9th century, when a hermit called Pelagius saw some strange lights pointing the way to a location in the forest at the old Roman cemetery. Then came the bishop, and then came the king Alfonso II. And they determined that these are in fact the remains of St. James. So that's how the Camino story began. People began walking and doing the pilgrimage to Santiago de Compostela. The first travel guide, or more specifically pilgrim guide, was Codex Callistinus, who was written in the early 12th century, who described in vivid detail how to get to Spain and back. Now, remember, we're talking about the age where certain things where we take for granted did not exist. most people in that time did not speak Latin, which was the equivalent of an international language. Most people have never seen a map of Europe. They have never seen a picture, a color image, let alone TV or internet. Their world was basically 20 or 30 kilometers from the place where they were born. For people in that time to decide to walk thousands of kilometers through multitude of dangers to Santiago and Compostela and back represents an interesting testament of faith. Those of you who walk the Camino, which I'm guessing are most of you, we have people from UK, Scotland, Croatia, from Austria, although currently in Croatia. So those of you may remember that as you approach the cathedral, just before the old town, there is a monument just before you cross the road, where it says roughly, Europe was born on the pilgrimage routes to Santiago. And that is, I think, very much the truth. I think in modern times, Europe is somewhat reborn on the pilgrimage routes to Santiago. So how does Camino look today? After 2 world wars and the Spanish Civil War and multitude of civil wars in Spain in 19th century, the Camino has died out for the most part. People have forgotten the routes and the custom, and only a few die-hard pilgrims made the route to Santiago de Compostela. So a priest came to the scene, Don Elias Valinho, who was a parish priest at Ocebreiro, who decided to single-handedly resurrect the Camino. So he got some donated yellow paint from a company who maintained the roads and started painting the arrows from Roncesvalles to Santiago de Compostela. The police asked him, well, what are you doing? So he said, I'm preparing an invasion. The police didn't have any sense of humor, so they locked him up for some time. That invasion really came to be. Nowadays, officially, over 340,000 pilgrims have walked the Camino. Unofficially, it's probably close to 1 million if we add all the people who haven't managed to reach Santiago de Compostela, who are doing their Camino in stages, or people who are walking the Camino in their other European countries. You can walk the Camino from the fjords of Norway to the Baltic states, all the way to Santiago, following the yellow arrows. Until now, Croatia has been one of the few European countries that hasn't marked the way to Santiago, but that's something that Confraternity of St. James is trying to remedy. Now, a few words from the honorary Spanish consul in the Republic of Croatia. He'll be talking in Croatian for the most part, so I'll be doing the translations and we'll see how that works out.
Hola peregrinos, bienvenidos al Camino de Santiago. Lijep pozdrav, dragi hodočasnici, dobrodošli na Camino.
Dear pilgrims, welcome to the Camino. This time at the island of Krk.
Iako je ovaj put virtualan,
although this route is virtual,
i siguran sam u to da ste vi kao pravi hodočasnici u ovim trenucima uistinu na vašem Caminu.
I'm sure that as true pilgrims, you are on your Camino.
Iskusili smo to.
We've been there and we experienced it. Each Camino starts in our hearts.
Pa stoga i vi u ove dane kada ćete pratiti
So
virtualni,
you, in those days where you will follow the virtual Camino,
stavite je pored sebe.
place your gear near you
Lijepo ponovno biti na
and relive the entire Camino experience.
Prošlogodišnje iskustvo na Krku nam je uistinu bilo posebno.
Last year's experience on Krk was really special,
Kao počasni konzul Kraljevine Španjolske da dajemo apsolutnu podršku
and as honorary consul of the Kingdom of Spain, we give full support to the project.
u Hrvatskoj, a i spajanje Hrvatske, Španjolske i Europe.
And through this, a connection between Croatia, Spain, and Europe.
Europa izgradila hodočasteći u Santiago de Compostelu.
Europe was built
Preostaje čuvati
on the Camino,
i razvijati
and it's up to us to protect
koja traje
and to nourish the heritage which lasts for over 1,000 years.
kralja Asturiasa, Alfonso II,
When Alfonso II, the king of Asturias, walked the original Camino Primitivo,
apostola Jakova Starijeg. To danas nazivamo Camino Primitivo. Pa evo, neka i ovaj naš Camino na Krku bude hrvatski Camino Primitivo. Uživajte na virtualnom putu.
Enjoy your virtual tour.
I za kraj vas želim pozdraviti.
And at the end, I want to share a greeting where pilgrims exchanged in the old days.
Idemo dalje, a drugi mu odgovara, idemo više. I skupa zazovu, neka nam Bog pomogne. Ultreya, Etsuseya y que Dios nos ayude. Buen camino na otoku Krku.
A greeting from the Codex Callistinus, one of the first guides. Onwards and onwards, and again onwards. May God help us. I see that we have some participants from Spain and Portugal. So, bienvenidos. Buenas noches a Coruña, Valencia. Bom caminho a Lisboa. So, how does Croatia fit into the Camino story? Well, since about 1203, there were active Croatian confraternities of St. James who helped pilgrims on their way to Santiago de Compostela. It's a journey for about 2,000 kilometers and back another 2,000 kilometers or more. So it was quite challenged to do it in medieval times. There was also an interesting custom that was mostly used by older noble ladies who were too old and infirm to do the pilgrimage themselves, but since they had money, they paid somebody to do the pilgrimage for them, a custom known as per anima mea, for my soul. Those of you who visited Saint-Jean-Pied-de-Port at the beginning of their Camino journey, or continuing of their Camino journey if you started in France, you may have noticed a cape, a pilgrim cape in the Pilgrim Museum, which is called Slavonica, for a region in Croatia. In the cathedral archives in Santiago de Compostela, there is even records that Croatian pilgrimages had special tax privileges upon returning home if they could prove that they have done the pilgrimage and show the shell as a symbol of their pilgrimage. In modern times, the Croatian Confraternity of St. James is active in promoting the Camino. We published a Croatian credencial, a version of the Pilgrim's Passport. You'll see it a little bit later. And the major project we're doing is Camino through Croatia, recreating the medieval Camino routes leading from Croatia to Santiago de Compostela. Šibenik, a town on the Adriatic coast, has a magnificent UNESCO World Heritage Cathedral of St. James. And the pilgrimage is even tradition, is even older than that in that cathedral. The yellow arrows, familiar to all of you who walk the Camino, have a typical Croatian twist. If you follow soccer or enjoy any kind of sports, you probably saw Croatian athletes wearing those checkered jerseys in red and white. So that's an ancient symbol of Croatian coat of arms. And we try to use those squares as a tiny combination of or symbol of the Camino arrows in Croatia. At this time, you can find them only at the island of Krk, the first section of the route that we marked. But hopefully in years to come, you'll see them throughout Croatia. So as we follow the custom of medieval pilgrims who walked the Camino, one thing they did before they started the journey, they asked for intercession of the apostle on their journey. So let's do it as well. A prayer I'm sure is familiar with all of you who received pilgrim blessing on the masses on the Camino. O God, who brought your servant Abraham out of the land of the Chaldeans, protecting him in his wanderings, who guided the Hebrew people across the desert, we ask that you watch over us, your servants, as we walk in the love of your name to Santiago de Compostela. Be for us our companion on the walk, our guide at the crossroads, our breath in our weariness, our protection in danger, our albergue on the Camino, our shade in the heat, our light in the darkness, our consolation in our discouragements, and our strength in our intentions, so that with your guidance, we may arrive safe and sound at the end of the road, and enriched with grace and virtue, we return safely to our homes filled with joy. In the name of the Jesus Christ, our Lord, amen. Apostle Santiago, pray for us. Santa Maria, pray for us. I'm sure most of you recognize the statue on the right. This photo was taken before the magnificent restoration of Portico de Gloria, the entrance to the Santiago Cathedral, which I hope we all will be able to see sooner rather than later. Our journey begins at the city of Krk, a starting point of the Camino Krk routes, and our journey will end at a small village nearby, Corniche, with the Church of St. James. The route is a circular one. It's about 107 kilometers, divided in 6 days. This will be our first day, and tomorrow at the same time, on the same Facebook pages and YouTube channel, you'll be able to follow the program for the following days. Krk is a city of culture and history, medieval seat of the Dukes of Frankopan, an ancient Croatian noble family. The mayor of the city will bid us welcome. He'll do it in Croatian, since I have to apologize in advance for any issues with the quality of the video and the material, but since the idea to actually making it happen today only took about 5 days to do all this, we had a lot of technical difficulties, which I'm hoping you'll be able to forgive. So let's hear the mayor. Warm greeting, dear pilgrims. Welcome on the Golden Isle to the city of Krk. Well, you spend the next couple of days in this different way, without traveling in person, through a virtual tour to the biggest Adriatic island, who prepared a pilgrimage tour on the island. We'll walk through our olive groves, through our dry walls, learn more about beautiful scenery, and of course, prepare for everything which comes, for a real experience after a couple of months, hopefully when this pandemic ends. So let's start a journey into this virtual world together. Now for a short greeting from a tourist board director for the city of Krk. Dear guests, dear friends of the city and the island of Krk and the Camino, welcome to the city of Krk and the island of Krk. Thank you for accepting our call. And thank you that you will spend the next 6 days touring places on the island of Krk. Let's do a slide tour at the streets of the city.
Ovo je glavna gradska ulica u starom gradu Krku, koja se zove Dekumana.
A main street, Decumanus,
U samom nazivu pretpostavlja
intersecting with
da
Cardo,
ovo je na
indicating
ovom
the
mjestu
Roman
još iz doba kada je
origins
grad
of the town.
bio rimski grad. Sada se približavamo mjestu gdje se Dekumana sječe sa Kardom,
The main
dakle drugom
intersection,
glavnom ulicom svih rimskih gradova.
which was the main
Ove
square
ulice
in
kao što
Roman
vidite
times.
sada su puste, međutim
The
tijekom
streets are
ljeta
now empty,
ovo
but
su
during the summer they are
ulice
teeming with
grada,
tourists.
mjesto gdje se događa sav gradski život. Ovo što sada vidimo, obrisi su katedrale.
You can see the glimpse of the cathedral with its unique dome and an angel overlooking and protecting the city.
Ovo je jedan od najprepoznatljivijih kadrova u gradu Krku.
This is one of the symbols of the city of Krk. This is the main square.
Nalazimo se na glavnom gradskom trgu koji se zove Vela Placa.
A great square in the local dialect with its Easter egg, flag of the city.
grada Krka. Ako se malo osvrnete po veleplaci, sve što vidite, ostaci su još iz vremena srednjeg
Everything that you see are remains from the Middle Ages, including the main well, decorated
vijeka, o vremenima kada je Krk bio pod Venecijom.
with the symbols indicating when Kirk was ruled by a Venetian Republic.
Nalazi se u jednoj vrlo
There is an even medieval clock, which uniquely has 24 hours, not 12, and it still works.
podeljen na 24 sata. I točan je.
This is the Kirk Cathedral that we talked about. You can see the bell tower a little bit closer.
Nalazimo se ispred jednog od ulaza u Krčku katedralu i ispred nas se ukazao spektakularni zvonik Krčke katedrale sa anđelom na
Much more spectacular in person. But since we can't be directly there, this can give us a little bit of the atmosphere.
na Krčku katedralu, na zvonik, na ulicu koja vodi prema trgu Kamplin.
The street leading to the second square, and the cathedral entrance, which is typically under a vaulted dome. The panorama of the city at night and the massiveness of the cathedral, the interior is definitely quite spectacular, and you can take a short walk where we begin our Camino inside a cathedral. Massive arches, old Romanesque style. A place where thousands of pilgrims have stopped on their way to Santiago. This is the main castle in the city, which used to be the center of the ducal power. In the summer, this place is usually a stage for various events and concerts that happen during the summer. And the remains of the fortifications are only part of the pretty large system which protected the city in the more turbulent times. You can take a virtual walk around the place, and the view from the battlements is really something special, particularly during the summer. So, before we begin our journey, we of course need our credencial, or a pilgrim passport. This is how Croatian credencial looks like, or at least a illustrated version of it. You can see it in more detail in this video. We are at a tourist office at the city of Krk, which is where we get our first stamp. Croatian pilgrim passport looks like this, with a map of shrines to St. James in Croatia, Pilgrim's Prayer. This is where your information comes in, and this is our first stamp. Cathedral as a symbol of the city, and the specific Glagolic alphabet, which Krk was a center of culture, a unique alphabet to these parts of Croatia, still thought today. So let's continue to our first stop in front of the cathedral.
Nalazimo se evo ispred same Krčke
This is where our journey
katedrale.
begins.
Postaja, krećemo na naš put.
We start our journey when Camino to all. And this is our first stamp, a virtual one, since we can't give you the original. And just to let you know, at the end of this tour, you'll be given a link to the website where you can fill out your information. You will get your e-passport or e-credencial. And if you collect all the stamps, you will get e-Compostela, the Croatian version of the Compostela. Once this situation stabilizes and travel is no longer restricted, we'll welcome you at the island of Krk, where you can pick up your Compostela in person. So let's begin. The first arrows. This is actually the first sign of the Croatian Camino, the first arrow officially marking the route. And it's always something that when pilgrims come across these yellow arrows, when they're strolling around Europe, not expecting to find them in Brussels, in Munich, in Poland, in Prague, and other places, there was always a kind of special feeling where you see them again. I remember after doing the Camino in 2014, my second Camino was from Lisbon in 2016, and seeing that tiny little yellow arrow next to the Lisbon Cathedral really made the angels sing. These kind of dry walls are typical to Croatian coast and the Croatian islands. And I remember that when I did the first Camino, I was surprised, actually. My God, doing 800 kilometers or 1,000. Well, isn't that only for athletes or for trained soldiers or somebody like that? Not for me, who has difficulty walking a couple of kilometers from the couch and back. Then I walked the Camino and saw that most people are essentially grandmothers and grandfathers who are usually much faster on the Camino than those who are younger. That was really fascinating, as is discovering that just by doing one step at a time, suddenly you're able to pass hundreds of kilometers. I wouldn't say without feeling them, because you definitely feel them, but it's a fascinating feeling nevertheless. Pilgrims, of course, who walk the Camino are easily recognizable by the Camino shell, a symbol of the pilgrimage. And it's always interesting how people who walk the Camino, no matter how much you try to explain, no matter how many pictures you show or videos, it's quite difficult to explain what the Camino is and to enrich the host, to describe the whole experience in words. It's something that people who walk the Camino easily understand. Those that haven't can only sense part of the Camino magic. Shadows appeared on this section of the Camino Krk as they did in Spain, because you're walking all the time towards the west, so your shadow is in front of you. There is an interesting legend tied to this. Basically, the story goes that the shadow that you're pushing in front of you represents all your worries, sorrows, all your pains, all your troubles. When you arrive in Santiago de Compostela, and if you continue to Finisterre, you are washed in the ocean, you turn around, and you start a long journey back home on foot, or at least you did in the Middle Ages, leaving your shadow behind you, because now you're walking towards the east. So I think that there is something to that legend. I think that all of us who did walk the Camino did leave at least a tiny bit of their troubles behind, even if it's just that stone on Cruz de Ferro. The first town and the first place for a break on the Camino Krk route is a small town called Vrh. It was settled in the 15th century, and it has a house of the Krk prosciutto. For those of you who haven't visited Croatia or experienced Croatian prosciutto, It's not as similar to Italian or Spanish version. It is smoked dry ham, but it's unique because of a very secret ingredient, which is impossible to reproduce in Spain, Italy. It's basically extremely strong north wind called burra, which blows pretty hard and which dries the prosciutto to the bone. That combined with a special flavor of the open fireplace really makes this a unique specialty. But first, let's see, how did we get here? So we started our journey in the city of Kirk. We followed the coast and we slowly exited the city, entering the areas with olive groves, lavender fields, with some unique smells and combination of sounds. Then a wide path through the forest, marked with these stone dry walls, and pretty soon we have reached the first town. Of course, we are not walking 19.8 kilometers per hour. We are much slower in real life, but it gives you an idea what to expect. That, of course, is the place for the next stamp, representing the St. George. The path to the town is pretty wide, and you can see how the prosciutto looks. I don't know about you, but even the images make me hungry just a little bit. The next place on the Camino is a very narrow forest path, and it's a place for our next stand, because we're passing the next village. The forest is pretty large, or pretty intense, not as big. You can pass it easily, but the path is quite narrow, extending to a section where the road intersects with cycling routes on the island of Krk. This was the group of pilgrims who walked the first and who marked the Camino last October on the island of Krk. The plan is to do it next October as well. Hopefully by that time things will get back to normal. Yellow arrows pointing the way, and of course, as you know, every opportunity for a break is something to be savored. You may have noticed, if you walk the Camino in Spain, that yellow arrows are easy to see and notice when you're walking outside a city. In cities like Pamplona, León, Burgos, sometimes it's easy to get lost and much more difficult to see the arrows. On the Camino, all the troubles that we have from our daily lives are much easier to put in perspective. We have a much clearer connection with who we are. What are we doing on this earth than we do in everyday life, where pressure and phones and emails and work and family obligations simply create so much pressure and sometimes distractions for our attention. Camino is, at least for me, a great way to purify that. First place for some real break reminded me of an experience I had in Spain on my first Camino. Those of you who walk the Camino will probably recognize the city behind those bushes to the left, and this hill, which goes not so steeply, but it's quite a long climb all the way to the top. It's one of the more popular or most best known cities in Spain, and definitely one of the best known cities on the Camino, famous for other things. But let's see if you can guess where exactly is that hill, after which city. So anyway, this was my third or fourth day on my first Camino in 2014, and I was really feeling the pain at that time. As I was walking the hill, which was not steep but definitely long, I was thinking, man, couldn't have somebody put some kind of a bench there? I mean, I could really use a bench to sit down and just rest for a little bit. After nearly 5 minutes, I saw 2 benches. These kinds of, let's call them coincidences, are something that Camino has quite a lot of, and something that I'd say happen quite frequently on the Camino. I'm sure that those of you who walk the Camino will be able to share a lot of similar details yourselves. So as we continue on Not Alto de Pedron above Pamplona, back in Croatia, we're following the arrows for the Croatian Camino. In the next town, we noticed another thing which makes the Camino special, and that's the kind of, I'd say, sense of, let's call it brotherhood for the lack of a better word, between not only the pilgrims, but also the local people who live there. Since unfortunately, the infrastructure is very much in development, so there are no water fountains on this section on the Camino. We stopped at one of the houses at the village coming up next, and the lady not only kindly offered to fill for all of us our water bottles, but also said, well, if you're doing some kind of map, make sure you put my place for anybody who wants water. I'll be happy to help. So that's one of the things that the famous local hospitality was demonstrated at that particular moment. The next section leads us to a little bit strange forest, something not quite, not something I was used to knowing the Mediterranean type of scenery. But this section will be having a director of the local tourist board who will show us around.
Hello everyone, and welcome to the Malinska Dubašnica municipality. I'm Daniel Manzoni, and I will briefly introduce you to the second part of the Krk Camino adventure. So let's begin. In the area of municipality of Malinska Dubašnica and the entire island of Krk. Its importance is confirmed by the name of our municipality, named after the oak and thick oak forests that always cover this area, which is also visible on the coat of arms of our municipality. With specimens up to 400 years old, local forests are among the most structurally preserved down oak forests in Croatia and further.
This section is definitely something, it's almost like a fairy tale. I was reminded of Middle Earth and the scenery for Lord of the Rings in this particular part, almost expecting a hobbit to come up, you know, from behind one of the trees at this particular section of the route.
Church of St. Apollinaris was first mentioned as a parish church about 1500 in a centrally located settlement in the Dubaštica field. A bell tower was built next to it in 1618. The village was ravaged by malaria, so the inhabitants moved to Bogovići. The old parish church was disassembled in the 19th century, and the parts and the construction materials were transported to Bogovići in ox carts, where a new church was built. Cemetery and original bell tower were left in Dubaštica field as a memory of past times.
And this is one of the unique sites on the island of Krk, but I would say in Croatia as well. Let's hear the story.
On the eve of the year 2000, Peter Turk, a returnee from Australia, erected a large cross on his land as a vow. Constructed of oak wood, the cross was put as a symbol of gratitude for his recovery from work-related injuries. The height of the vertical beam is 660 centimeters, and the width of the cross beam is 350 centimeters. It weighs 840 kilograms, making it the heaviest and the largest wooden cross in Europe. Owing to its mystical and tranquil location on a hill with a breathtaking view of the northern corner, this place is known as a site of prayer, rest, and meditation.
And that you gain a better perspective how it actually looks like, a truly spectacular and unique setting. Olive groves, forest paths, uniquely suited for hiking
With over
and
50
cycling.
kilometers of hiking and cycling trails of Dubašnica, you can truly experience the beauty of nature. All trails feature a relatively small altitude difference, making them perfect for entire family.
And we're slowly approaching the end of our first day on the Camino, entering the town of Porat, which was derived from the word harbor. A quiet harbor with a tradition of hospitality is one way to describe it. So let's see, how did we get here? So we continued our journey from the town of Vrh, following the next village. And this is where we entered that pretty narrow forest, all the way to the road. These paths are usually well marked and well maintained. This is the approach of that oak forest with that unique setting. And we see the approaches to Porat from this side. The whole day is about 17.6 kilometers. For most of you Pellegrinos, it's not that big of a hike. So it's a leisurely kind of walk where you can really enjoy the scenery and the local atmosphere. Last stamp for today, the Franciscan monastery at Porat, an ancient place of learning, we'll learn more about and you can see for yourself.
Da.
The name Porat is derived from the Latin noun portus, which means port, dock, which is the function that this place had in the wider region of Dubaštica. In the auspices of the Franciscan monastery, we should look for the beginning of the tourism on this part of the island of Krk, because it was a perfect place for rest and lodging, which is exactly what Porat is today.
And let's see more about the Franciscan monastery, one of the main attractions in the town. That brings us to an end of our walk for today, but not quite the end of our program. We do have a short meditation narrated by the Dominican Ivan Dominic Ilicic, the student chaplain in Rijeka, a meditation prepared by one of the Croatian pilgrims. It's in Croatian, so I'll be doing the translation.
Sve mogu u onomu koji mi daje snagu.
I can do everything in the one who gives me strength.
Većina ljudi
Christ.
kojima govorimo o svom iskustvu hodočašća na
Most people
Svetom Jakovu
that we
kaminu,
talk about our
redovito
Camino
se začude
experience
o broju prijeđenih kilometara i danima,
are usually
pod
impressed by
navodnicima potrošenih na
kilometers and
hodočašće.
days
Toliki broj
spent on a
kilometara, dnevna žega,
pilgrimage,
jednostavnost noćenja, neizvjesnost
simplicity of
putovanja,
overnights,
nekima je nepojmljiva.
uncertainty,
No to je
heat.
tako ako se izuzme duhovna dimenzija.
That's if you're not
Bez
looking at the
duhovnosti i
spiritual
sudjelovanja
side.
Krista u hodočašću,
Without a
Camino
spirituality,
postaje samo jedna avantura
Camino
koje se
is
lijepo
just another
prisjetiti.
adventure that's nice to remember.
Ako se na hodočašće pozove Krista,
If you invite
putovanje
Christ on your
ima drugi
pilgrimage,
smisao.
your journey has
A
a
Krist
deeper
je na
meaning.
putovanju i s onima
Christ
koji ga
is
ne
on a journey
priziru u svojim
even with
molitvama.
those that don't ask
Krist
for
je
his
s onima
presence in
koji u njega
prayers,
ne vjeruju.
even with those who
Krist
don't
na
believe in
starom
him.
hodočasničkom putu
Christ
vrstan je domaćin
on the
svima
pilgrimage
onima
host,
koji krenu na put, jer on je
on the
put,
pilgrimage is
istina i život.
host to everybody
On
because he
postaje
is the way,
suputnik i
the
supatnik.
truth and the life.
Brojne
He is the
kršćanske
companion.
oaze na putu, kapele,
Many
crkve
chapels,
i
crosses,
katedrale
churches and
postaju
cathedrals on the
mjesta
way
gdje hodočasnik može odmoriti dušu.
become places where a
No
pilgrim
Krist
can rest his
izlazi
soul.
i na ulicu, puteve, staze. On putuje s hodočasnicima
Christ travels with
i
each
daje
pilgrim
snagu.
and gives strength.
Vjeruješ li u snagu odozgor u svome životu?
Do you believe in the power above in your life?
Dopuštaš li Kristu da te nosi tijekom tvoga
Do you
životnog
allow
hoda kroz
Christ
pustinju?
to carry you through the desert on your walk of life?
Dopuštaš li Gospodinu da hoda uzate na tvojim životnim
Do you
putovanjima?
allow the Lord to walk with you on your journeys in life?
Dopusti Kristu da bude tvoja snaga.
Allow Christ to be your strength. We are nearly over with the program, but as I promised, here is how you can get your pilgrim passport. With all the electronic version, as I said, until the time you can come in person and pick it up at the island of Krk in Croatia, just go to hrcamino.com/day1. Fill out your name, the country where you're from, and we'll send you tomorrow morning stamps for today. Tomorrow, if you decided to join us on our journey, you can collect the next stamps that come on the second day. And at the end, you'll receive a Croatian Compostela. Like I said, an electronic version of it. That's more or less it for me. Once again, thank you so much for participating. Muchas gracias a todos peregrinos de España, de Portugal. Let me see if I can remember this. Kad mile falche for all of you from Ireland. And a buen camino to all. I hope to see you again tomorrow, joining me on the next day of our Camino journey, discovering that the island of Krk also has a wine fountain like the one at Monastery Irache on the Camino, discovering a paradise road next to the sea where the road will take us tomorrow. So same time, same Facebook, same YouTube channel. Once again, thank you for participating and buen camino de la vida to all.